everybody. Welcome to Iacon Online. My name is Suna, and over here is WasaBee or Maddie. And we are super, super excited to be hosting the Diversity in Transformers panel. As you can see, we have an amazing group of guests over here. Mae Catt, Jack Lawrence, James Roberts, and Thomas Deere. And if you haven't heard of any of them, what are you doing? Because they're all fantastic, and we are so excited to have you all here. Thank you so much for joining us and being willing to chat with us about some stuff.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Good to be here.
So, first question I think that we had for everybody is, we can probably just go in a circle, chit-chat if we want to, but can you give us a little bit of a rundown, everyone, about your background, not just about your career, but who you are and how you got to where you are today? So whoever wants to start, go for it.
I'll go.
Good.
Hey everybody, I'm Mae Catt. I think my Twitter handle, my little Twitter bio says I write cartoons and horror movies, which is accurate. It should also say now multiracial and queer, which is also very true. Just for a fun factoid, I'm Chinese, Filipino, Jamaican, and then my dad's just white. Background-wise, you know my work probably from Transformers Cyberverse, and I've also been very lucky and fortunate enough to work on Young Justice, Marvel Rising, Marvel Spider-Man, and a couple other things I can't talk about yet. Oh, and Critical Role's Legend of Vox Machina is coming up. And for the horror movies, I've written on 50 States of Fright, which was on Quibi, and hopefully one day will be resurfaced so that people can watch it. Yeah, that's kind of me. That's what I'm all about.
Well, I'll go next then.
We're all very introverted, as you can see.
Well, it's just one doesn't want to appear rude, does one? So yeah, I'm Jack Lawrence. I'm as we all are, I guess. I'm a huge nerd, big gay nerd. As we've established, big oldest in the room, gay nerd. I am a big D&D player and fan. For my career, started in comics in 2003 and have just been working mainly in Europe for the earlier part of my career. And then 2014, started at IDW with Skylanders, and then shortly after that got Lost Light working with James. And I've kind of got my feet under the table at IDW now, and they're hard pressed to get rid of me. So yeah, I'm here for the long haul.
Ooh.
I'm glad you've come out of your shell.
Yeah, it took 45 years.
Shall I go next then? Okay.
Yeah,
I'll follow in Jack's footsteps. So James Roberts, although Jim actually to everyone else outside of comics. I didn't really plan to get into comics. I was a big nerd, not a gay one as far as I know, but so the odd one out maybe in this group. But I did a lot of fanfic. I had a very responsible public servant type career for many years, doing benefit work and social housing and things. And alongside that, I started to work with other creators like Jack and like Nick Roach, and sort of just for fun. And that turned into an opportunity to work for IDW back in 2010. Thanks to Nick, he and I co-wrote Last Stand of the Wreckers. On the back of that, I was offered the opportunity to write one of the two ongoings that IDW were going to launch. And that was mainly with Alex Milne. And then that was More Than Meets the Eye. That morphed into Lost Light after about 56 issues. And then Jack came on board. The title finished a couple of years ago after a pretty good run. I've done some other IDW work with Starcadia Quest. I've done some quiet behind the scenes work on some computer games, some world building stuff. And then I've sort of most recently sort of diversified a bit. I've done some non-fiction writing work. And then strangely, as of this month, I've started presenting a current affairs TV show, but a local one. So yeah, that's me.
All right. I'll try to follow I'll have to be very honest, guys. I'm kind of shy, but you'll have to bear with me. So my name is Thomas Deere. I'm from the Mohawk Nation at Kahnawake, which is an Indigenous nation that's just outside of Montreal, Canada. We talked a little bit earlier about that. It's kind of cold out here right now. So I've been at IDW now for the past 10 years or so. I guess for a while I was the official fill-in colorist. So I didn't really work on any one series for a long period of time. I kind of did a lot of fill-in work, and I'd say the last 2 years or so I've been doing cover art. So so before that, I kind of got into comics from through Dreamwave when Transformers was housed at Dreamwave. I was brought in to be a colorist, but unfortunately, about maybe 2-3 months of being there, they folded. So I never had any published work through Dreamwave. And from there, I went on to Fun Publications and BotCon, doing some work through them. And then I was recruited at IDW. But that's I guess that's my freelance night job. During the day, I work in our community at our cultural language center, and I work on a variety of hats at the center. I work as a librarian, work as a historian, cultural liaison, and the graphic artist at the center. So I've been at the cultural center now for about 50. So that's what I do during the day, and that's what I do at night.
Fantastic.
Hi, Thomas.
Also, as someone with a last name that's also an animal, recognized game.
Thanks everyone for just giving a little overview. It's wild to try to summarize that much. So let's go into a little nitty gritty. So going off of that, how do you believe your life experiences have influenced you in the creative spaces? So I guess transferring some of what you've experienced into, well, does this turn into like some kind of representation in what you work, or just maybe even just a stylistic choice?
That's a good question.
Yeah,
It's a good question. It's a good question.
I love how the questions go from like 0 to 100.
Yeah,
we're jumping
Like,
right in.
talk about yourself straight into like, now how do you do that?
Yeah, let's go. There's no in between when you're a marginalized group. Every day is 0 to 100.
I thought it was going to be like, where does Optimus's trailer go? But no, it's.
Well, where does it go, James?
Well, that's
Okay,
that's
where
a very
does it
good
go?
question. Can I go back to the other one, please?
It goes wherever my gender identity goes every day.
Well, I'm going to give everyone else some time then and sort of ad-lib something. It's a good question. I mean, to a greater or lesser extent, the stuff I write is quite political. And I suppose that's the big animating force for me, in my life. Without wanting to get pretentious about it, I guess, or too grandiose about it. But yeah, I'm sort of what motivates me in life and creatively is a sense of wanting to understand things and then work out why certain injustices have come about and then try and do something about them, whether that's in whatever part of my career. So that's part of my answer. Trying to understand how things work and why things are the way they are, I guess, feeds into this thing I've got about trying to world build or try and create like a rich or richer sort of fabric story by whatever means. So whether that's trying to create a deeper relationship between characters, or trying to, in the case of More Than Meets the Eye and Lost Light, trying to establish a history around how the society works and the notion of transformation and what it means outside of sort of the physical, stuff like that. So yeah, not the best answer, but I'll work on it for next time.
Oh, that wasn't the best answer. Whatever.
Humble brag all you want. Humble brag it up.
A little humble brag. No,
Honestly, More Than Meets the Eye brought in such a diverse fan base. Watching like early Transformers Tumblr as I don't know how old I was, 17-year-old, suddenly seeing so many people talking about Transformers and this inclusive experience that they were getting through More Than Meets the Eye and Lost Light, especially when the first canon trans Transformers came to be. And it was just kind of a like, yeah, here they are. Why is this the most absurd part of this comic when we have Grimlock and a baby and Whirl and a baby and something called the Rod Pod?
I will say, because when I got hired for Transformers Cyberverse, I wasn't like the biggest Transformers fan. I was very into G.I. Joe, as you can tell. But I had not participated actively in fandom. So part of my deep diving right before I started was binging More Than Meets the Eye. I don't think Lost Light had just started coming out, but I read that like in 2 days, and I was like, I now understand. And I would say I obviously brought a lot of that into Transformers Cyberverse, which I think made it into various forms. Quite literally, Whirl is in there, and then other just subtle things of like, to me, this is what Transformers means, and just, you know, the idea that representation you're writing is perpetuating representation that I find significant in the fandom, or in the IP rather, and that is in turn leading me into directions of like, I want to continue pushing this and perpetuating it. It's very cool. It's guys, low key, very excited to be on this panel.
High key, really hyped to see everybody.
I'll continue gabbing for a moment. I'll say, fascinatingly, and this might be a fairly common multiracial, biracial experience, but for a very long time, I didn't think about my race. My family kind of immigrated and we're Americans now. And so there wasn't too much cultural identity there. And it's only as I've gotten older and entered into the entertainment industry and gotten, you know, some modicum of success that I have recognized the value of the things that make me different, and they have led me to wanting to embrace those things and learn more about them, to infuse in my writing, to bring it some authenticity and some variety and some ability to represent as many people as possible, because that's honestly the goal, isn't it? Is to represent as much of humanity as you can, because for so long there might have been much more of a narrow view, perhaps, maybe, and just expanding that into anything. And particularly with something like Transformers, you can do that. It almost is. It is, ironically, for a thing that was meant to sell toys, is almost designed to be easy to represent all kinds of situations and all kinds of people. And I hope to be able to do that and continue the good work that I think these gentlemen started for me, at least in my personal journey.
Yeah, I think. Sorry, James.
No, go. What I was going to say was that it was really lovely to hear that, and yeah, I mean, there's a question later on about legacy, but I think I've got my answer already. Thanks.
No reading ahead.
It's always lovely to hear that how people have been affected by Lost Light and More Than Meets the Eye, and it's every single con I go to. There's multiple people telling me what it means to them, and that's, you know, that it's an honor to have been part of something so important. I think that I was trying to work out how you voice how your experiences affect what you do, because of course you are shaped by your experiences, and therefore what you create is a product of those experiences. And I'm not the most critical thinker, so I don't analyze what that is without saying everything I do is gay. But it is. Everything I do is gay.
That.
It has. That's the thing. Is it? Can I get deeper than that? No, I can't. I want gay characters out there. We need more. Well, not just. I'm talking about my personal life experience. We need a diverse range of people from every single walk of life. Like,
do you guys in the comic industry, do you guys run into issues where you have to, how do I phrase this as diplomatically as possible? Are there situations where you have to explain why you want, particularly like a gay character? Because there are moments where I have to explain why I want something, it's not meant to be malicious or bigoted. It really is just an honest, like, but why?
That has been the case through the early part of my career, and in fact I started in the industry with a creator-owned book called Dark and Veil, and it was about a school kid who was new to this town, Dark and Veil, and there was all sorts of creepy going on, and he was gay, and he met this other kid, and they fell in love, and it was never said. Because it was 2003. That sort of thing just didn't, even that recently, that sort of thing you couldn't just easily get away with. But people who had shared my life experience knew, and I was getting emails and people at conventions saying, "Are Ryan and Troy gay?" I was like, "Yes, they are. Thank you very much. You got it." But the publishers had no idea. So yeah, I mean, back then, yes, you would have to explain it, and I knew that if I said, it might have been creator-owned, but they were publishing it, so obviously they had a say. I knew with these guys, if I'd said I want these two boys, because they were 14-year-old boys as well, and it was non-sexual because goodness me, but if I had said to them I want them to be gay, they would have said, "Oh no, we don't want to do that." So I didn't ask them and didn't make it explicit. Now we have the very good fortune to have, I personally had the very good fortune of having David Marriott as my editor, and he absolutely gets it. He only have to look at his Twitter bio to see what a great guy he is. So you never have to explain why you need representation of anyone to him. In fact, I was on a panel last year. No, not last year, because nothing happened last year. The year before, at a con in 2019, and I was a non-binary panel, and I'd been called on really because they by a non-binary friend of mine, and they had no one else to really have a voice who was actually in the industry. There were plenty of NB people there, but none of them were in the industry as a professional. They were the hobbyists or just fans. So I was brought along just because I'm LGBTQ plus. And I was able to email David very, very close to the wire, because I didn't find out I was on the thing until really late. And I was able to email him and say, "Do we have any NB characters that I don't know about? Because I can't think of any." And he gave me this long email about what his plans are for non-binary characters. And I just read that and I thought, yeah, this is why I love working with you, because I knew you'd give me something. I didn't realize we were going to have all of this. So yeah, you don't have to excuse or explain with certainly with the people I work with at IDW.
That's great to hear.
I mean, with More Than Meets the Eye, we kind of, well, I wouldn't say hedged our bets, but I only really had to have a conversation with the editors once about when Rewind and Chrome Dome were going to when we were going to move from the implicit to the explicit with a declaration of love, and I kind of appended to the script preemptively the argument in favour of doing this, but it didn't come up against any opposition, and I was really lucky actually. And to briefly revisit the other question, I mean, I'm really lucky anyway, being probably I can't speak for Thomas, but probably amongst all of us talking now, the most privileged in terms of power, being white and straight and het and cis, etc., and where I live and all the rest of it. So yeah, because sadly, tragically, the world is built around people like me. I don't really come across many obstacles. But in the context of gay relationships within the comic, there could have been pushback. I think you were saying before, really, that there is probably an advantage to them being mechanical. But in any case, had editorial had issues, it would have been a problem. Anyway, they didn't. And once we'd established that, and critically once, because, you know, it's not 30 years ago, that there's like a constant feedback loop in terms of what people think of what they're reading in real time. And so very, very quickly, IDW could see that there was overwhelmingly a positive reaction to this type of thing, to this type of thing. You know what I mean? To that development. And I caught myself. It's all right. And so once we sort of established, once we'd set the precedent, then we could develop a lot of other gay relationships as well. And then by the time it came to Lost Light and I wanted to introduce trans characters, I mean, it was in the best way possible. It just didn't register. It was just, yeah, fine, let's all keep going with the comics. So yeah. Again, my experience, of course, is through this sort of prism of privilege. So yeah, it was good that we got to do it.
But I wanted to continue with a little bit about what Mae was talking about earlier, because her story really resonates with my life. I'm also biracial, so my mother's Indigenous, my father is white. But I grew up on what people call here the reservation. I prefer to call it our territory. But I grew up here my whole life. We're a matrilineal society, so we take identity from the mother's identity. So the rule of thumb in our society is you are who your mother is. So I lived here my whole life. I had a good relationship with my father, even though he lived in a different town. But I'd say that growing up as a kid, I'd say there wasn't anything. I mean, I had the same experiences that all other kids my age had in our community. But when it came to knowing about my own identity, in terms of even my own language, for Mohawk language, it was something that I'd say wasn't all that important to me. And then when I was 14 years old, something happened in our community. An event happened here. A land dispute turned into an armed conflict. And I had to make a choice at that time if my foot was going to be in the canoe or if my foot was going to be in the ship. And that's a saying that we have here in my community. And so I remember thinking, well, I'm only a kid. I'm only 14 years old, but how could I help? How could I contribute to what's happening in our community? Because when I looked around our community, all the men were picking up weapons and defending the town. And about halfway through that siege, which lasted 78 days, the Canadian government mobilized the army, and we were surrounded. We were surrounded by the army for 3 months that summer. So I had to do some real soul searching to say to myself, what role could I play? And there was things that probably popped into my head. I can't say with certainty what those words were, but they probably sounded a lot like freedom is the right of all sentient beings. You know, and growing up with Transformers and Star Wars, the Rebel Alliance, the heroic Autobots, well, I knew which side I was going to be on. And there's even that line at the beginning of Transformers movie, Transformers 86, where the valiant Autobots were preparing to take back their homeland. And so those things really resonated with me. And a lot of those 80s experiences sort of paved the way to make that decision for me when I was 14. So when I was 14, of course, the conflict eventually ended. And it was sort of almost like a post-war kind of feeling in my community for the next few years. But I had made a commitment that summer to make sure I was in the canoe and not the ship. So I had to make a commitment to learning our spirituality, making a commitment to learn our language, to learn everything about our culture. And when I was about 18 years old, we have it's hard to explain. It's in brevity, but we have something called the Longhouse in our community, and it's a gathering place where the community goes for spiritual functions and even political functions, because we believe that there's a connection between our political life and our spiritual life. And there's a ceremony that we have for children, and we call that Adawasit Sanagarada, and it means that we're going to elevate the names. And it's a tradition that we have to introduce the children in our community, these babies, to the community and to the natural world around them. And there's in the speech, there's a part that they say, we don't yet know what gifts this child was given, but it's our responsibility to encourage whatever gifts that they have, and that it's the child's responsibility as an adult to use those gifts to share with the community. So when I was 18, and by no means was I somebody, was I in a unique situation, because a lot of teenagers that went through that conflict that I was talking about all made their way back to the Longhouse that summer. And because we didn't go through that ceremony as children, we went through that ceremony as adults or teenagers. And I remember those words when they did that ceremony resonated so much. And I already knew that I wanted a career in art. I already knew that I wanted to, that was my gift. So I figured after that, there was a way I could use my gifts to be socially responsible. So in a way, there's kind of two sides to my career. There's the fun stuff, which I do at night, Transformers and the comic book work. And I'm really pleased to share that I've been working on Star Wars Adventures lately, and getting a lot more cover art. I'm really happy about that. But there's something that anchors me or ties me to the community. So I continue to work in our community as a graphic artist in our cultural center, where we try to find, because you can't just go to a bookstore and get language materials for the Mohawk language. We have to invent them ourselves. So part of my job is to come up with those teaching materials and to teach them from a graphically or narrative manner. So for me, there's kind of two sides to my career. There's the side that I have fun with, and then there's the side that has social responsibility. So I think I answered the question, but
yeah,
oh boy, did you?
Definitely did.
Yeah.
And I'm so happy you did a deep dive into that, because I've been wondering for a long time, because just reflecting on that social responsibility and how it kind of ripples outwards. I think I started following your Twitter account either after TFCon Toronto or after or right before TFCon Los Angeles in 2019. And I remember the first time I started seeing the artwork for the Mohawk community. And I was like, oh, I had no idea. That's really cool. And then, then I get like, oh, hey, look, it's jazz. But it was just fascinating, and honestly, like it was amazing to see somebody who was also doing this for their community while also drawing robots and having fun. So it does, it does resonate. It definitely, it matters, even if it doesn't fully transfer over into a creative work, knowing that just being active on social media on top of having the Transformers work and having your community work, it's really cool. It's a great learning experience.
That line from the movie, the Autobots are on their way to take back their homeland, that hits me so hard, dude. And again, speaks to they're not human beings, and thus they can exist more as metaphorical beings for our purposes. Yep. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
And that's for me at least. I'm sorry, I'm tearing up a little. Don't mind me.
Yeah, me too.
These are so many. There's so many stories that we just don't get to hear about, and especially the stories of Indigenous people. It's something that is never really taught in the mainstream, and the fact that you're speaking up about it and putting that into your artwork and creating pieces to spread the word about that is just amazing, because you just have to wonder, would people even know these stories if people like you or you weren't telling them? And that's kind of sad, but it's also great that everyone here is coming out and doing those things. So, wipe my tears away. Okay. So kind of piggybacking off that a little bit, I mean, clearly we have a very diverse group of people here, Indigenous people, LGBTQ people, James, and
and James.
It feels like to be a minority.
Yes.
Transformers clearly is we touched on this a couple times, but the fan base is just so incredibly diverse, and there's so many people that have been drawn to this group, this franchise, from so many different backgrounds. And do any of you have any idea why you think that might be? Like why Transformers in particular has such a diverse group of fans, and also, just everybody.
I think, but my personal feeling is because we're welcoming, and we say it's cool to have gay characters and trans characters. It's not a big deal. Here they are. Look at them. Because I think any fandom has the potential to do that, and then there comes a stumbling block. I mean, Star Wars representation is awful, and that I hope will change, because I'm a huge Star Wars fan, but I want more from it. But I think any other fandom, in my experience, if people even start to ship two characters together, they get rotten fruit thrown at them, figuratively speaking. Whereas with Transformers, people will create their ships, and we all go, yeah, it's cool, yeah, carry on. That's my feeling. It's just that we're welcoming.
There's a fascinating thing I've experienced, particularly with Transformers fandom and other fandoms, and working professionally, that there is for when I've encountered like cishet dudes who have no idea about like what shipping really is, or they're vaguely aware that horny teenage girls like it but don't understand it. There is this weird sort of like, oh, that's not for me. That's a little, not to say it's gross, but there is just sort of just like, oh, I don't want to associate with that. That's not something that I want to participate in, because there's these weird like connotations of like particularly in kids animation. If I were to suggest, can these two characters be queer? Can they be friends, or can they be in love? There is instantly a thought that I am talking about these characters in a sexual context, because they're equating queerness with sexuality, and that is obviously in kids anime. Like, why would I be sitting there in a room being like, I want these two things to in front of the children? That's obviously not what I'm saying. Yeah,
that's been the fight from day one, hasn't it?
Yeah, and just to like consistently, like, and again, it's never malicious. It's very rarely malicious or bigoted. It's always just comes from a place of, I've never heard of this, and it doesn't seem like it's for me, or it doesn't seem like it's anything I want to participate in or know about. And just having a portion of the Transformers fandom just be like, no, it's cool, absolutely, yeah, they're in love, whatever. They are expressions of being alive. They're like, which is, oh my god, I'm gonna get on my soapbox for a second, but it's like that's what art is after all, and that's what fandom is and popular culture is. It's just an expression of what we're all experiencing. There's my impassioned speech about that. There you go.
I mean, it's difficult to follow that. I mean, I guess looking at it a bit clinically, I mean, it's been 37 years this year that the franchise has been going, but it's ebbed and flowed, and it wasn't really until the Michael Bay films that it became a kind of evergreen brand, and it had that extra sort of clout, and it could diversify in terms of multiple continuities and multiple stories. But until then, really, in the 80s, we really just had the comic and the TV show. And then it kind of died a death. There was Beast Wars, which was the first step, really. If I'm thinking of the romances within that show, that was the first sort of tentative steps towards exploring sort of relationship-based stories or romantic-based stories. And then when I've got to be really careful here not to sort of imply that it's all down to the comics, but which of course it isn't. But when IDW had the license, we IDW were quietly allowed to go about doing their own thing, because the movies were being made and they were huge and flashy and they were getting all the attention. And through some strange quirk, and maybe we'll look back on this and we'll find that there was just a sweet spot when, for a few years, Transformers was a $1 billion brand, but it wasn't hyper scrutinized within sort of the corporation. There wasn't like a drive to synergize everything and have set rules and have a single Bible. It wasn't over designed as a brand. Bottom line, for a while, and maybe now, I'm not sure, I can't speak for now, but for a while the comics could just explore their own little corner of the universe. We didn't have tens and tens and tens of thousands of readers, but we had a bit of reach and we had a bit of an impact, and that was the right set of ingredients to enable us to explore things. Now, all of that would have been for nothing if we hadn't had a sort of accepting, loving, open-minded, tolerant, that's a bad word, but you know what I mean, sort of a fan base that wanted those things and celebrated those things and broadcast that to other people. So it's probably a strange combination of all those things, the right time, the right place, receptive fans who then spoke to other people, and then it became a lovely virtuous circle, because we got the type of people that jumped on board were already hungry for that type of thing, and were, not to generalize, but they were sort of compassionate, creative, loving people, and it all just worked to sort of give it the boost. And then, I don't know where I am in the timeline, but then, in other media, people picked this up and ran with it, or they had their own ideas, which were easier then to explore, because there was some kind of precedent for them. But like I say, I've got to be careful not to trace everything back to a few years of the comics. The ingredients were already there. As I say, it was probably that strange time for a huge global franchise. It was strange to have these little pockets of freedom. Various people, many different creators, both inside and outside of the comics, made the best of it, and we've kind of banked it now. So it hopefully is going to be hard to row back and put stuff back in the box.
I'd say, going back to the original question, the real strength or longevity, or the strength of longevity that Transformers has, is in its ability to reinvent itself, and that there's really something for everybody. So you do have something for the kids. You have something that's a little bit more in the gray zone that we might have read in James's Lost Light, and so there's really something. There's something for everybody, and I think that distinguishes Transformers than, let's say, Star Wars, because in Star Wars there's a canon that everybody's trying to pigeonhole their views into, or in Transformers there's something for everybody. There's you could look even going back to the original Marvel series and the G1 cartoon. Both of those stories were very different from one another. And I think right from the beginning, there was a tempo that it could reinvent itself over and over again. And I think that's one of the best things that exists in this franchise, because nobody's trying to pigeonhole it into what they think the fandom or what the canon should be.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of the live action films at all. I quite like the first one, but aside from that, they're not my thing. I love that they exist, because there's a whole huge fandom for them, and they may not even necessarily be the sort of people I want to hang out with, but they love it. They love what they love, and that's great. And I can have what I love about it, and they can have what they love about it, and we need never come into any kind of conflict. So yeah, you're absolutely right. There is something for everyone. And
if I could just quickly echo some of what you were saying about the folks at IDW, I have to really share that The creative teams that I had the opportunity to work with were all such great people, understanding people, allowing you to take risks, such great cooperative people.
Yeah, I love them.
Speaking of IDW and the rest of Hasbro, as if we haven't been already, here's more of a fun one for everyone.
Oh my God.
Yeah, no, it's super fun. What's been your proudest contribution to Transformers? And May, I'm barring animation flaw Acid Storm, who's now non-binary.
I don't know what you mean.
No, of course not. Acid Storm.
Acid Storm is Acid Storm.
Acid Storm. That's Acid Storm's gender. Acid Storm.
Acid Storm's gender is whatever they say it is.
Oh, if I could start, I'll just share that. I've been at IDW now for 10 years, so it's hard to kind of pinpoint something, but I am immensely proud of being on the same creative team as Margaret and Corn Hall on Windblade. It was I was the only male on that creative team, and I had no problem with it. It was so cool to be a part of that series.
I think that the thing I'm most proud of is actually not canon. I mean, if we're talking canon, then I'm proud to have been involved in the creation of Anode and Lug, because I think they're incredibly important. And I love that. I didn't even know they were going to be trans when James first kind of gave me the brief. He just said that they are, Lug particularly, that they don't have the stereotypical female Transformer design, which I just thought, well, that's fantastic, because I'm not a huge fan of that anyway. I want to move away from that because up to that point, all different shapes and sizes that women have weren't represented. So that was as far as I was concerned. I was just designing a female character who didn't conform to that stereotype. And then, of course, when it came out that they were both trans, I was just it's just amazing. And then there was the people who had them on their placard at a Pride march. I was just, this is just amazing. So that's, I mean, how can you not be proud of that? But I think I'm most proud of the ridiculous number of shipping commissions that I've done, and the fact that I'm, I kind of, it didn't occur to me how rare, I guess it is that a professional would be open to doing that stuff for people, and it's just it's just drawing love. And I'm a big cheeseball. I say that all the time. I am just a cheeseball, and I love love, and to be able to be able to create what someone really, really wants and give it to them there's no feeling like it. I mean, last year obviously we had none of that because there were no conventions, but being at a convention and handing over that commission of, I don't know, swerve and whirl in a loving embrace, and then that person just, and sometimes you'll see tears well up in their eyes, and there's no feeling like it. I don't know if that's pride or just a feeling of connection, maybe, but that's what I love most about the whole thing.
Jack, you're the softest, soppiest. I was going to swear then. It was an affectionate swear word. Yeah, the softest, soppiest.
There's two kinds of people in this world.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess I can answer in terms of canon or concepts that I've created. Like Conjux Endura, kind of take that as an umbrella term, really, for the whole nature of relationships and and LGBT representation and so on. I think that's I'm glad that's in there. I'm very glad that it's that people have taken it and run with it. So I hopefully through Modern Meets the Eye and Lost Light, the Transformers universe just became a little bit softer, and we're able to look at things like, Jack, it's already been said, but look at things like love. And I remember having a conversation with when we went out to talk about Dark Cybertron, and Andy Schmidt was he'd been my editor for Wreckers, and he was now with Hasbro, and everyone. John Bell was there too, and we'd had this session trying to work out what Dark Cybertron was going to be about. Our contact at Hasbro had always been really emphatic that this was to our advantage. Definitely, he said, "Oh no, I want the characters to seem human." And time and again, we'd sort of use that, not necessarily because we were up against it, but just sort of preemptively, we'd say, "Look, if they hate each other, then they can love each other just as forcefully, you know." So, yeah. So the notion of sort of just it being a softer environment where people could not just be in love but talk about it, and all shades of affection and friendship and things, and to sort of foreground stories in those things for once was hopefully that will echo on. Well, I think it is. You know, looking at the stuff on TV and IDW2 that's happening now, so that's good. And then more broadly than that, I'd echo what Jack says, and I've seen the fandom change in a lovely way over the last 10, 12 years. There's always been a multiplicity of people that are into it, but it is definitely, for the first 2/3 of its existence, been dominated by guys, and to see that balance out as it should. And become far more diverse, and as a result, make for a far richer, more inclusive, and better community. That's I'm not saying that's down to us, but it's coincided with my time, and so it's been lovely to see that happen.
Hello. I will say so far my proudest contribution is episode 212, I Am the Allspark, in which Starscream, imbued with the power of God, is able to confront his abuser Megatron. And I say abuser, it's a kid's show, so it wasn't like we could have all the colors and all the layers and I felt the immense weight of their dialogue, of whatever their interaction was gonna do. I know you can shrug and be like, it is just a kid's show and it is just an 11-minute show that's gonna end up on YouTube, but like I felt the weight. And to have it be that, Starscream says, I really should thank you for all the pain and the humiliation and the unrelenting cruelty. And then Megatron just says, you're welcome. And Starscream's like, no, this is the part where you beg for my forgiveness. Like, I was just like, this feels so right. And, I'm particularly, I love Cobra Commander, which means I love Starscream. And I, oddly enough, love character dynamics that are these like very toxic relationships of someone is obviously not in the power position in the relationship and is abused, and just the dynamics that can come from that, of like coming out of that, like, God, someday to be able to imagine a Starscream that can come out of that relationship and say to himself, I've been abused, that would be a dream come true. But just to infuse it for a moment in that episode, that is so far my proudest contribution. Secondly, I would love to finally be like, hey, Clobber. I will take Clobber. Yeah. Clobber came about because we just loved that design, and I was just like, we need a little bit more female body diversity. And we had so many women. Cyberverse is one of the magic moments of elements of Cyberverse was how adamant everyone on the creative team and within Hasbro was like, no, we need more female characters. And that meant either creating some or gender bending some. And with Clobber's case, it's a little bit of both. But I am happy. There was a moment I was just sitting at my in the room, and we had a printout of a bunch of characters from Animated and G1, and I was like, this one should be a lady. Look at them. Look, how great would that be? And she's great. I love her in the show. She became quickly a favorite within the room.
What about Transformers appeals to you? So we kind of did that, but anything else that's fun? Because I know I'm a giant Bumblebee fan, and that's kind of my driving force behind viewing any kind of Transformers content. And what other fan bases are you a part of? And if you see a difference between a Transformers fan base and another one, what's kind of the biggest difference between those?
I don't really get involved in fandoms, to be honest. I'm really only involved in the Transformers one as a professional, and I love it. I love it's very different from when I did contribute to the fandom years and years ago, before being a professional, and I didn't fit, and now I do fit. So it's there are years between those two experiences, and it's stark how much it's changed. I never felt like I really fit before. Now I really feel like I fit. But I'm not involved in any other fandom because I as I mentioned earlier on, I absolutely love Star Wars, absolutely loathe the fandom. I don't want anything to do with that. The toxicity involved in that fandom is just appalling. It's horrible. So I actually have the term Star Wars muted on my Twitter. Now that's partly for spoilers, but partly because I just don't want to see all of this bitterness going on. So it's unfortunate, but I kind of steer clear of it. I have my little pockets of fandom, and that's my friends who also enjoy the same stuff. I will say that the D&D fandom I am part of, and that's wonderful. That there's so many. I mean, that's very diverse as well. D&D has, as we all, I'm sure, all know, has exploded in recent years, and the diverse fandom, fandoms as a whole, this whole group of people who become involved in different fandoms has always been diverse, I think, but hasn't had the voice, hasn't had the representation, and now they do. Even in the D&D books, in the player's handbook, it specifically says if you want to play a character who was born a different gender, then do it. Or if you want to play a character who is attracted to the same gender, do it. They are very explicit in that they're in being inclusive. So that fandom is, you can't say anything along those lines of that nature without being absolutely shot down by. The ratio on that would be incredible. So that's a lovely fandom, but I think there's still, the tyrants of fandom are still holding sway on a lot of different IPs, unfortunately.
It's interesting. I'm actually, I got started by writing fan fiction on fanfiction.net. Like I was there before AO3. But even as a teenager who was like throwing herself into the Matrix fandom, I was by nature am a lurker, which offers me some protection against greater fandom dramas that do occur. Sometimes I either just stay all the way out or I am totally ignorant of it. But I will say I actively participate in fandoms as a lurker so that I have the ability to sort of step back and be like, oh no, this is getting too much for me. But with Transformers, at a TFCon Burbank, I was lucky enough to be on a panel with Margaret Scott, and she very sweetly was like, oh, I have a table. Do you want to hang out? So I was like, oh, cool. So I hung out by her table, and a gentleman came up to me with a Transformers book, and he was like, would you sign this? And it was the first time anybody had ever asked for my autograph, and I opened it up, and he had gotten it signed by basically everyone and their mother that ever worked on anything Transformers. And I found a little corner, and I signed it. And I said, do you mind if I take a picture of this? Because it was such a huge deal for me as well. And I think him sensing that what a momentous occasion it was for me, he was holding it for the photo. And then he looked at me and he just said, you're a part of this now. And it was so deeply moving because I had known that. I'd been working on Cyberverse for probably at that point a year, like nonstop. But to have someone on the outside of my experience recognize that in me and have it be this fan, I was just so deeply moved. And for me, that has always, not only has the queerness characterized my understanding of the Transformers fandom and the diversity, but like that singular moment of this like immense human kindness. And for me, that has always been consistent with my experiences of Transformers fandom. It's just been this loving, embracing place. And thank goodness for it. I'm so lucky. I'm so lucky that one of my first professional things was Transformers, and I'm always going to be grateful for that.
I'm too busy being uplifted over here. I also obviously cut my teeth on fan fiction too, mainly, if not exclusively, Transformers fan fiction back in the 90s, early 90s. So I was really into the fan fiction side of Transformers. The only other fandom I was part of, again, thousands of years ago, was X-Files. My eldest son, I'm sort of living it vicariously through him, so he's into he likes Star Wars, but like you, Jack, he just stays well away from the toxicity. He likes Avatar. What else is he into? Gravity Falls and stuff like that. But it's really nice seeing him explore these things. And touch wood, so far he hasn't had any kind of bad experiences. But yeah, it's
I'd say some of the opinions that like Jack and me had. I probably have the same opinion. Peripherally, I have other interests. Star Wars is probably the biggest one. G.I. Joe, some DC, some Marvel, but I don't think I have it in me to infiltrate another fandom. I think the friends I've made in Transformers fandom is more than enough, and I don't think I have it in me to go down the rabbit hole for other fandoms because I'm afraid of what I'll probably find. But other than that, I mean, I love films. Like James was talking about his son. It's funny. I have three children. My youngest, who's going to be 6 this week, seems to be going through every interest I had growing up, but at an rate. So he had his Popeye phase. He had his Superman phase. He's kind of entering a trend phase. But right now, everything's about Indiana Jones, and it's perfect timing because apparently there's going to be a new film coming out in a year or two. But I love films, and not much into sports except boxing. I love boxing, so I am a part of that, unfortunately, which could be probably just as toxic as any other fan. But I enjoy boxing. My oldest son is really into Transformers, and especially Siege War for Cybertron, which I imagine is exactly what they were hoping for when they created that it would get his age range. But it's really cool for him to come up to me and say, "Hey, this toy." So it's pretty cool.
So I think the last question that we have, what advice do you have for up and coming creators? Just people that maybe want to be part of the industry or are just interested in the fandom. What advice would you shoot at them?
Just get involved. It's so much. It's all so much more accessible now than when I was starting out. The internet is so just get involved. Get involved with the fandom. Make your voice heard. And have fun. I think that's the thing. Just enjoy it. Don't stress about it. Just have fun and work and get involved.
There's really kind of 2 parts to that. There's the technical aspect, of course. You got to draw. I'm talking from a artist's perspective, anyway. You got to draw. You got to practice, hone in your craft, and then the other side of that is the networking part of it. And I know it's the proper term, but I think making friends is probably a better way of looking at it, especially in a fandom that is so close knit already. So make friends in the fandom. Eventually, you're probably going to talk to somebody who is involved in the industry in some way. But at the same time, approach it as a friend and not as somebody who's badgering another for work or to get their foot in the door. I think just having, the ability to read the room sometimes if you're invading somebody's space or privacy. Going to shows is another good way of making friends and meeting people in the industry. I would really encourage people to go to shows. And there was something that I remember when I was in my last year of illustration school. We had a teacher that was, I forget the class. I think the class was called The Business of Illustration. And he told us some basically rules that that helped guide me through my career. And the first rule was take the work and figure out how you'll do it later. And I think the wisdom in that is that you might not be sure if you're good enough, you might not be sure if you have the technical know-how to pull off a job. My professor's advice was, you'll figure it out if but take the job. And then as kind of a runner-up to that advice, he also said, you're only good as your last job, so you better pull it off. There's some of the things that really stuck with me as I was trying to build a career in comics.
I mean, my personal route was unusual. I think in comics, it is harder to get a break if you're a writer than an artist, just because the traditional routes of showing off your work, at conventions or whatever, it's easier for an editor to detect your skill, if you have any, or your talent quickly if you're an artist than you're a writer. So it's a bit tricky. But to talk in general terms about sort of, as Thomas said, honing your craft, I would say from a writer's perspective, I'll start with the obvious advice, which is just to keep on writing. Don't overanalyze what you've written. Keep pushing forward. You do want to be able to look back on your earlier work and detect some kind of progression, or ideally you want to look at something you've done today, look at something you did 6 months or a year ago, whatever, and think, okay, this what I'm doing now is better. So learn from your own mistakes. It's important to have a kind of a supportive network of people, or even a couple of people that you trust, and people whose judgment you trust, or whose taste you trust, to give you feedback, because it can be quite an isolating job. As an aside, don't let anybody talk down fan fiction. It's a fantastic way to develop your skill. What other nuggets of wisdom? I think picking up on something else Thomas and Jack said, build networks. So, think of everyone that you meet as a potential collaborator, or as somebody that will open a door for you. I don't mean that in a sort of exploitative way or a cynical way. It's probably better to say don't treat people badly in case you burn bridges. And you see that sometimes actually with aspiring creators online who are just behaving obnoxiously. And that's not going to do themselves any favors later on. What else? That might be it for now, I think.
I mentioned at the beginning that I started off sort of at Dreamwave, and unfortunately they tanked before I was able to get anything published, and that really crushed me, because I thought that was my opportunity to get in the comic industry, and I thought I wasted it, or I thought it was gone. Something kind of fortuitous happened. Of course, in terms of the friendship building I made during Dreamwave, I did get to meet and make friends with people like Josh Perez and Josh Burcham and others that were around at that time. And Josh Burcham had reached out to me and said, did you watch VH1's I Love the 80s or I Love Toys? I can't remember what show it was. And he says, I think one of your illustrations is being used in the background of one of the talking heads. And so sure enough, I checked it out, and it was an illustration that was mine. So I was pretty happy about it, but I wanted to get to the bottom of how did they find that drawing, and why did they use it? And I knew that I had sent a portfolio to Fun Publications to see if I could get some work through Fun Publications. And so when I wrote to Fun Publications, I said, I'm just curious, have you shared my portfolio with anyone? They said no. But what they ended up saying is that they did need somebody because they were in a pinch. They needed a colorist because they were in a pinch. So if I was willing to drop everything and get to work like the next day, they would have work for me. Unfortunately, the next day to go to San Diego Comic-Con.
Oh, gosh.
So I looked at my wife and I said, well, I guess I'll have to bring a laptop, and I didn't really know what I needed because I didn't have a tablet or anything at the time. This is probably around 2006 or so. So I packed up my laptop and I got to work when I got to San Diego. Of course, this book is longer than 5 days. So I had another trip that was booked as soon as we got back to go to the United Nations to represent the Mohawk Nation at the United Nations for, if anybody's ever heard of the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, it wasn't passed yet by the United Nations, but my community, the leadership in my community, put me on this delegation to go with some leadership. Everybody was getting to work. Of course, everybody has laptops, but I had to try to hide what I was working on, because as everybody's big speeches at the UN, I was working on Transformer comics. My colleagues that were in the delegation were kind of getting miffed at me because they said, "Don't do that here. Everybody's going to get mad at you." Anyway, the end of the story is I made the deadline. And and after that, I got consistent work, and eventually I made an impression enough at IDW to get hired. But if I didn't meet that deadline, I probably wouldn't have had a career. So that's how important it is to be reliable. That's another critical piece of advice, is be reliable.
I will speak from the perspective of you want to work particularly in animation or television or even film. This is going to sound counterintuitive, but you absolutely must be yourself, because particularly in this point in history, there is, as I said earlier, a sincere desire for diverse voices and diverse representation. And there's not always, as I said, they don't always know how to properly implement it. And that's where diverse writers and diverse creators would come in. And it's fascinating because you really are selling yourself as, like, obviously, let's just assume you have the talent and the talent and the samples to back up that you are a writer and deserve to be there. Now it comes a moment where you have to sell your perspective in the world, and because that is the thing that makes you unique. I mean, it's Hollywood. There's hundreds of thousands of people who come here with very similar dreams to find success and work on these things. And the thing that makes you different is whatever makes you unique and your unique perspective. And you know, that applies especially to something like Transformers, which is a property that has a legacy and is as old as it is and can be applied to other properties. Like, the only way there's immense pressure when I got on Transformers Cyberverse. It was like my first real professional room, but it was also this thing that had so much legacy. Like, I have a lot of friends who are in their 40s, and to know that they were the 10-year-old sitting down for Saturday morning cartoons. Yeah, to know that they were there, and now I, in some part, am going to be responsible for perpetuating that. It was very frightening. And over the course of working on that show, I really realized, like, the way I can contribute to this massive thing that is so much bigger than me is by maintaining my unique perspective and infusing that in the work and infusing that in this thing. I can give a little bit of myself to it, and that is what will be unique and hopefully survive future iterations, or at least, at the very least, someone else who is like me will see it and it will mean something to them, and in that way it will perpetuate. I mean, it happened right here. I read More Than Meets the Eye and I'm like, this is what I should be doing. And that's my little piece of advice. It might sound frightening it's interesting because what I'm actually asking you is to be incredibly vulnerable in an industry that will eat you alive, and it inevitably will. That's just how it is. It is at times an uncaring place, but it relies on creative people who are vulnerable. Like, it relies on the creative energy of people like me and these gentlemen and people like you to really understand how to make stories. And yeah, it's scary and it's frightening, and it takes a lot of pain and a lot of effort, and it will always take longer than you want it to. And it's not any failing on your part. It just is hard and it takes a long time. But I think it's possible. If I can do it, you can do it.
That would definitely be that's what will play over the penultimate scene of a documentary about,
right?
Yeah, that was just cut to credits.
Thank you. I think very deeply about these things. I'm uniquely prepared for this singular answer.
Yeah.
Ended with a freeze frame.
I think what you said there, May, it was that's the most important point, is that someone down the line, you what you create will be important to that person, even if it's only one person, someone who is struggling with life and needs something, needs to hear a voice, and we have the potential to be that voice. I think that's the most important thing, and that's why I love conventions so much, because people come to me and say, I needed someone like you, and here you are. And that's because I never had that. Growing up, and I can't even remember who my first gay character, in entertainment, who that first gay character was, because by the time they came along, I was a fully fledged adult, and I didn't need it anymore. But as a kid, I desperately needed to know that there wasn't something wrong with me, that I was, and I didn't have it. It was at a time in this country where it was illegal for teachers to even talk about it, so I couldn't go and speak to teachers about it. There were no gay characters in anything. Of course, this is the 1980s. There were no gay characters, and any gay comedians or overtly gay, a lot of them, their public persona was that they weren't gay. Well, we all knew that they were, but they weren't saying it. So that's no good to a kid who's struggling. And those who were explicitly gay were not what I wanted to be. They were kind of caricatures, and I guess very funny to 1980s straight audiences. I've no doubt what I wanted to be, and I had nothing. So to be able to create something that, the idea of a 12-year-old kid who's struggling and has no voice and has nothing, to actually provide something for them and say, you're going to be okay, and because there's nothing wrong with you, and this is, here you go, this is for you. I think that's incredibly important.
Yes, and it's so fascinating, because every once in a blue moon I'll run into somebody who wants to dismiss pop culture or wants to dismiss Star Wars, and it's you don't understand, though, not to puff us up and not to say we're more important than a doctor. I'm not saying that, but there is a fascinating use that pop culture, or at least to even speak more broadly, stories has for people, and particularly for diversity, because and again, in this point in history where we're just starting to actually value other voices in actionable ways. Sure, people valued voices always and forever, but in actionable ways that you can see and be this is a character that I made pitch on properties and I've been so fortunate to pitch on properties that I love and adore, and be able to say, this is the show I want to make for little May. I know that I needed this as a kid. For me in particular, I needed shows that showed me the value of female friendship and other women. I grew up very self-loathing and self-misogynistic, and I needed something to show me that was wrong and that it was okay to love that part of myself. And you're absolutely right. It's such a privilege to be able to hopefully do that, and hopefully do it more in the work.
Yeah, and I think I totally agree with you, and that actually quite interestingly brings us right back round to that very first question: how our life experiences dictate what we're doing, because we are creating for our little young selves, and that's I think that's fantastic.
All of your guys' answers have been so insightful, and it has been an absolute pleasure to talk with all of you. I will go ahead and put everybody's social media links somewhere on this screen. So you should absolutely follow everyone if you're not already, because they're all amazing people, and it has been such a pleasure to talk with all of you. Thank you so much for being here at IACON Online. Till all are one. Bye-bye.
Thank you.